Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Carol Van Sickle. I do support mainly out of the Athens office. And today we're going to be covering our Meta EMIS staff reporting document. This is a document that has a lot of detailed information on how to do the reporting and some different tips and examples of different situations and how to report that through the USPS system. This document, as you can see, is a really large document. It's 55 pages long. So I don't really recommend printing it, but definitely download it so that you can, do searches through it. We have different links in there that you can click to get to different information. So it's really handy document to download and just open up on your PC. Okay, and then hopefully all of you saw yesterday, I did another update to the document as I was going through. I realized I hadn't updated one of the reports, so we'll talk about that when we get to that section. So the document that you should be looking at when we're going through today, if you have the old one, it's not that big of a deal because there wasn't major changes. We'll show you what was changed. But on our website, if I can get to the right link here. There we go. Okay. So on our fiscal services page, so on www.metasolutions.net, if you come to our fiscal services page, the document, and if you're not sure how to get there, I'll just do that real quick. Okay. If you go to our main page or anywhere on our website, if you go to member resources, you'd want fiscal services state software, and then this links and documents tab. And then if you go all the way to the bottom, okay, there's a documents section, and we do have an EMIS staff link here. So this is where you'll find the document. So this is the latest version right here, Meta FY26 EMIS staff reporting, and it has yesterday's date on it. Or I'm sorry, I guess that was Tuesday, wasn't it? I'm a day off. Okay, so it has Tuesday's date on it. Okay, so if you download this one, you just click the three dots. You can download it, save it on your PC. This has two views. Mine always goes to this view. You might come in here and see this. You can toggle between the two. But again, once you find the right document, it's the three dots and then download. Okay, so in case anybody needs that, that's how you can get it. Okay, let me see if I can get back to my document here. Okay, we have a lot to cover. It's hard to get through every single thing in the document in detail. I mean, it'd probably take a whole day. So there's some things I'm probably going to start skimming through. But if you have any questions on that information and you want me to cover it in more detail, please let me know. Feel free to ask any questions at any time in chat. So if you go to the Zoom chat, please send it to everyone just so in case I miss it, somebody else on my team, and we even have our Meta EMIS team, some of them are on here as well. So, maybe they can help answer any questions as well. But for those of you that are in the EMIS world, more in rather than the fiscal services part, hopefully you'll find some things that will help you understand where some of this data comes from for the staff reporting. And, hopefully everybody gets some good tips and information out of this. You can also ask questions by unmuting your microphone, so feel free to chime in anytime. And I do have my chat open, so I will try and keep track to see if anything comes in for questions. But if not, somebody can let me know and tap me and I can answer it. Or, maybe somebody on the team will answer it for me. Okay, so let's get going because, like I said, there's a lot to go over. So for those of you that might not be as familiar with EMIS staff reporting, maybe you're newer to the district, the first page of this goes over some of the basics. Okay, so right now we're in fiscal year 2026 reporting. EMIS staff is called Dataset L. And the EMIS data collection calendar actually lists the opening and closing dates of the reporting. And for Dataset L, it's divided into two separate windows. So we have the first reporting window, which opened on September 4, and it's scheduled to close on January 28. And then the second reporting window will start on February 5, and that is scheduled to close on August 5. Now, keep in mind that these dates are subject to change. So usually if we find out the closing date is going to change for some reason, we let everybody know that. We'll send out an email to let you know. But you can always go to the DEW website and look up that data collection calendar to see if anything has changed at any time. Okay, there is a note here. So sometimes when I say reference DEW, people are like, what's DEW? Okay, so back in October of 2023, the Ohio Department of Education was renamed to the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. So we now refer to them instead of ODE, we try to say ODEW or DEW. So if you hear us say that, that's what we're talking about. So that just reflects their new name. This next paragraph just talks about, your data is collected and reported on an ongoing basis. It could be collected and submitted daily to DEW. Typically that's not that common, but, if you should be in the process now of collecting the data, reviewing the information, looking for and correcting any errors. So it's just an ongoing process during the collection periods. And you'll hear us refer to the two separate reporting windows, either as first reporting window or first collection, and then the second part is second reporting window or the final collection. And then this just lists the entities that are required to report staff data. And then down at the very bottom, this note in green. So any changes that were made to this document compared to last year's document, anything added into the document will be in green font. And then if we're removing anything, you'll see a strikeout over that data. And anything that was changed on last year's document for the prior year, those have already been incorporated in here. So that's all been cleaned up. Okay, this next page is just a summary of period L reporting. It's one reporting period, which is referred to as L, with a break at the semester. You want to report all staff changes as they occur throughout the period. So especially for USPS, if you get a bunch of new hires and you enter them into the USPS system, if you have a mid-year contract change and their amounts are changing, during the year, whenever that happens and you update your USPS files, you'll want to let your EMIS coordinator know that and let them know to go ahead and do a collection. You can then check to see if there's any errors with any of the new data you're reporting. And then if everything looks good, you could go ahead and get that data submitted to DEW. For supplemental reporting, and we'll talk more about that later, you want to just go ahead and report that right away. So, as you're hiring for supplemental positions during the year, go ahead, get it in the system. Again, go ahead and make sure a collection is done and get the data submitted. For staff that leave the district during the year, please remember, as soon as you have that information, go ahead and enter a separation reason and separation date on their record as soon as possible. Okay, and we'll talk about more about those situations later as well. Any position that you're going to report as a supplemental is based on the position type. So that position type needs to be set to supplemental for it to be reported to DEW as such. When a new reporting year opens, you want to make sure the EMIS fiscal year is correct. And I'll mention that again later. And we actually have screenshots of how to do that. And I'll show you where it is through a demo account as well. Okay, and then this last bullet point here, this is just a reminder that it is date driven. Okay, so when a collection is done, based on the fiscal year that's being reported, it's going to look at dates on the records in USPS. So the perfect example is for FY26 EMIS staff reporting, it's going to be looking at dates within the fiscal year date range. So that's July 1/25 to June 30/26. So those are the records if it's marked reportable to EMIS, and the compensation start date in USPS is in that date range, then it's going to be reported. Now, when you get to the end of the reporting period, so the final collection for FY26, remember that closing date isn't scheduled until August 5. So by that time in the USPS system, you're going to be entering new contracts for the new school year, especially for your administrative staff, that often start July 1 or August 1. So all you have to keep in mind is what start date am I using on those new compensation records. If that date is July 1/26 or later, then you're okay to go ahead and mark those records as reportable to EMIS. Okay, because, we're still in the FY26 final collection, and it's not going to look at any dates past June 30 of 26. So those are okay to mark. However, if for some reason you are using a compensation start date that's June 30, 26 or earlier, and that does happen occasionally, based on how you do your processing, keep in mind you will not want to mark those records reportable to EMIS. You'll want to wait until the FY26 EMIS staff reporting has actually closed before you mark those reportable. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now, this next section is the actual table of contents for the rest of the documentation. And again, one of the advantages of opening this up on your laptop, on your PC, is that these are clickable. So as I'm looking through the table of contents, if I have a leave of absence situation, for example, I can just click on that and it will take me right to that section of the document. Okay, so that's kind of a handy feature. Okay, excuse me while I scroll back up. Okay, so that's the table of contents page. And then right after that, we have another summary of EMIS processing for staff. So again, this mentions that dates are an important part of the EMIS reporting. And in this paragraph, it outlines some specific dates to keep in mind for EMIS reporting. So in the USPS system, there is a position hire date that is used for EMIS reporting, and there's also a separation date. Those two fields can be found under core and the EMIS entry screen, which we'll talk about that in more detail here shortly, or the actual position record for the employee. Then other dates to keep in mind besides the compensation start and stop is the calendar start and stop that's on the compensation record. Okay, and that comes into play when you're reporting attendance and absence days to DEW. Okay, and we already talked about the compensation start date earlier. And there's just a note here, as far as I know, this is still true, that, DEW will process files every day at 5 p.m. So if your EMIS coordinator submits your data prior to that time, then they will process it and run it through their system. Okay, so the next thing on this page, and this is very important, we've sent emails about this, so hopefully everybody has done this already. But if you haven't or you want to double check it, the most important thing you can do when we start a new reporting year for EMIS staff is to go into the USPS system and go to System Configuration, EMIS Reporting Configuration, and make sure that year is updated to the current fiscal year. So that year should say 2026. So on this page, there are screenshots that show how you get to it. And then here's what it looks like here. I do have a demo account that I'm going to log into. Okay, looks like I'm still in there. And make sure it didn't time me out. I'm just going to refresh it to make sure. Okay, so I logged in as a test user. And my test user has what we call group manager access to USPS. That is the most typical access level. It's actually the highest level that somebody at a district can have to the USPS system. Treasurers are usually given that access automatically, and then typically the payroll person will have that access as well. So if you have that access level, then you will be able to look at this and check it. If you click on System and then Configuration, you'll see a list of options here, and I'm going to click on the EMIS reporting configuration. That shows me this information. Please do not change reporting ID or ZID prefix. Those need to stay as is. Those are defaulted for your district. But what you're concentrating on is the fiscal year. Okay, so it should say 2026, and yes, it has a comma in it. That's just been there since we started using the software. Hopefully, eventually they'll take that out, but it will have that comma, and that's fine. If yours is not 2026, make sure you're in edit mode. So there is a little pencil icon here, and then you can go ahead and change it and save it. Okay, so that's really important that that is completed. So if you know you did it, you're good. If you're not sure, you can go in and double check it. If you don't have access to do this, you can contact one of us about that. I do see a question in chat about when we should do this. You should be doing this now. Okay, as soon as the new reporting period opens for the fiscal year, then this step should be done. Okay, so now is the time to do it. Thank you for that question. Okay, let me see if I can get back to my document here. Okay, so very important to do that step. At the bottom of this page, this just gives you some information about how your data is collected. So from USPS, when your EMIS coordinator runs a data collection for data set L, your data is automatically pulled in from the USPS files. The exception to that is if your district has to report contractor staff employment records, that's most commonly used by ESCs, or if you're reporting a contract-only record. And we'll be talking a little bit more about those two specific records later on. But if you're reporting either of those records, then someone will have to actually extract those files out of the USPS system. It'll create a TXT file. That needs to be loaded into the data collector and those files collected on as well to get those reported. Okay, so again, we'll talk about those more in a little bit here. Okay, top of the next page, we highly stress that the USPS users and the district EMIS coordinator, keep your communications open, work together to get this data reported as accurately as possible. After your data is submitted to DEW, they do additional checks on the information. So in the data collector, your EMIS coordinator can see if there are any errors related to staff, and they can be in communication with you to help fix any issues that arise. Okay. Last sentence here is underlined. Okay, that's because it's really important. You need to keep in mind that you need to keep your data corrected and as current as possible, so that that data can be submitted as often as possible during the collection periods. Okay, now we're going to talk about this EMIS entry area. If you've never used this area before, I'll tell you, I really like it because it's a good place to go to see all of the EMIS reportable fields for your staff. So if you're a USPS user, you should already have access to this area. So it's a good place to go when you're focusing on EMIS staff reporting and you need to look at information or maybe make changes. It's an easier way to find some of those fields that you may need to update. Districts can give their district EMIS coordinators access to this area if you want. They can have read-only access so that they're limited to only this area and they cannot edit anything. Or you could give them edit access if you want to allow them to make updates to those fields. EMIS coordinators, if you do get this access and you do have update access, again, anytime you're making changes, even though it's just EMIS reportable, you'll definitely want to keep that communication open with the USPS people at the district. And you just say, hey, I need to make some updates to this data. This is what I'm going to do. Just make sure you give them a heads up. Okay. But, you don't have to give them access if you don't want to. Every district has their own comfort level of who they want to access USPS, but it is available, and I'll show you what the read-only access looks like. The thing to note here is that the compensation record data is not currently available within this screen. So, if you're working with your EMIS coordinator and there's some data in the compensation record that they can't see and they need to verify that information, then you can get that information to them. Or if they do have the read-only access to the EMIS entry, there is a report that they can run, and we'll talk more about that report. The SSDT, which for those of you that might not know, that's the state software development team. They're the ones that actually write and update the fiscal state software. They have what they call a feedback issue to add the feature to put compensation data into that EMIS entry screen. Okay, but right now it's not available. So the alternative to that, probably the best alternative, is to run the SSTT EMIS data extract report. And again, we'll talk about that in more detail later. Before I jump into my demo, though, here is a screenshot of what that EMIS entry screen looks like. So you'll see up to 4 tabs. Okay, you may or may not see the EMIS contractor and EMIS contracted service. Okay, because a lot of districts don't report that information, so it might not even be on your screen. If it's on your screen, it's like, I never use those. We can remove them if you want, but it doesn't hurt anything for them to sit in there. The 2 main areas you'll be using, though, are the first 2 tabs, the employee entry, so that's where the demographic information for EMIS is reported from, and then the EMIS position entry, which is position record information. That's part of the employment record that's reported to DEW. Okay, so I'm going to go over to my demo account. Okay, and this particular login is for a USPS user with group manager access. So that's why I have all these options at the top of my screen. If I go to core, okay, you do have the EMIS entry option. So let's wait for that to load. Okay, and I have all 4 tabs available. So you can see I'm on the employee entry screen. You can kind of see it's a little bolded on that tab. So that's the screen I'm on currently. And for those of you that are familiar with USPS and the grids, you can customize these grids. So I can go over to more here. And let's say, well, I don't really need to see the social, so I'm going to take that off. But let's say I want to look at, this is a good example for later. I want to check my long-term illness. And I also want to see if they're marked report to EMIS or not. Okay, and so I can open up all these different areas and see the different EMIS reporting fields that you can look at. So you can add these to your grid. If I close this, it's going to refresh the screen. And keep in mind, if you do this while you're on one of these other tabs, if you change the grid and then close it, it's going to refresh, and then it's going to push you back to the first tab. Okay, it just always does that. So whenever there's multiple tabs on a screen, if you refresh one of these other tabs, it'll push you back here. So then you have to go back to the tab you were on. Okay, but in this case, I was on that first tab, so I'm good. So you can see the Social Security number is gone, and now I have the report to EMIS column and long-term illness. Okay, so you can set this up however you like if you're looking for something in particular. It also has a report option, and you can filter. So let's say I only want to see employees that are true for report to EMIS. Okay, I can just start typing a T there, and now I'm only seeing those. Long-term illness, this is one way you can check long-term illness, and we have a whole section about long-term illness in the document that we'll cover. So I'm going to look for anything greater than 0. Okay, I don't have any long-term illness reported in these files, but that's how you can check to see if somebody has long-term illness reported. And again, we'll talk about that more in detail later. But as you're filtering, if you want to generate a report, you can do that by clicking this button. By default, it's going to do PDF format, but you can change that if you want a different version. So you can put it in Excel if you want. You can change the name of it if you want. It has a summary report option, and you can also show any specific options you selected. Okay, and then just click Generate here. Okay, if I view one of these records, okay, and you see I do have an edit option here, and it was on the screen here. Okay, and again, that's because I have group manager level access. If I click to edit, these fields up here are not modifiable through the EMIS entry screen, but everything else is. Okay, so if there's anything that needs updated in here, these are all the EMIS reportable fields. You can make those changes in here if you have that access. Okay, for the position entry, if I click on that, so again, remember this is only position record information. And the other piece of the employment record, in addition to the position record, is the employee's compensation record. And again, you can't view that on the EMIS entry screen yet. Okay, so again, you can customize this if you want. So I can click more again. Again, I don't really want to see the social. And I'm showing the position number. So again, maybe I want to see the reportable to EMIS. Maybe I want to look for certain position codes. So you can select whatever you want. I'm going to close it. It's going to refresh. And remember, I was on the second tab. So now that it's refreshing, it's going to put me back to that first employee entry tab. So I need to go back to position entry. Okay, and now I can see those updates I made. You can even move fields around, so I can grab reportable to EMIS and drag and drop it over here, and I can change the order. So however you left the grid last, except for filtering, filtering goes away when you navigate away from it. But the columns you selected and the order, those will stay there for the next time you come to this area. Okay, so again, you can do filtering for certain things. You can run a report. Okay, and if I view one of the records, again, you're going to see all of the EMIS reportable information for the position record right here. Okay, and I do have the edit option. So again, certain fields are not modifiable. So the employee info is not. You cannot change position number or position description, but everything else is modifiable if you have that access level. Okay, the CJ record, again, your district may or may not use that. So if you have a contracting situation, you have an employee you're contracting out to another district, this is what this is used for. Contract service is if you're contracting with a third party for specific services. Again, we'll talk more about those two options later. But if you do have records that need to be reported, for those two, you do have to extract that data. So you just come in here when everything's updated, extract it, and then it needs to be loaded into data collector and submitted to DEW. Okay, now I'm going to log out of here, and then I'm going to log in as EMIS test. Okay, so this account has access to only the EMIS entry screen, and it's read only, so they can't do any updates. So you can see there's a lot less options listed at the top of the screen here. Right on the home page, there's no reports that are showing on there. If I go to core, there's a date codes area that some districts use, but you'll notice there's no options here. So even though there might be some options showing, this user doesn't have access to do anything with it. Okay, but the EMIS entry is right here. So again, those same tabs, but you'll notice it's view only. There's no edit button. And then if I click on one of these, there is an edit button here, but you can see it's grayed out, so it can't be clicked on. Okay, and then for the CJ and CC records over here, they do have access to extract it. Okay, so if your EMIS coordinator is given this option, they can extract that data for you because you have to give it to them anyway to load into the data collector. But with this access, they can extract it themselves when you tell them it's ready. For reports, if we go to report manager, there's not going to be anything there. So again, there's not really anything here. What they can run, though, is EMIS reports here, the EMIS data collection reports, and the data extract, and we'll be talking about those more in a little bit. And then under utilities, they can change their password. Again, even though it shows some of these things, they can't do anything in those areas. Okay, so just so you know what that looks like. Okay, I'm going to go back to my other user here, just so I'm logged in. Okay, but we're going to go back to the document here. Okay. At the bottom of this page, there are a couple of documents on our web page. You can click this link to get there, but this is what they're called. So there's a staff employment elements matrix and a staff demographic matrix. So I'm going to show you what those look like. Let me just click it so I can get right there. Okay, and again, you can switch views. I always like the list view so I can see the name a little better. But down here, if I click on the demographic matrix, and again, you could just download these. I'm just clicking just to open it for now. Okay, let me make that bigger. Okay, so what's nice about this matrix is, for one thing, it lists the record field numbers. Okay, so these field numbers are coming from DEW. And so if it starts with a CI, that's referencing the staff demographic elements. Those are referred to as CI records. So if you get any kind of messages that reference certain fields, it'll probably have this field number on it. So you can come out here and see what it's talking about. Usually it has a description too, so you can tell. But then this gives you more information as far as what the name of the field is called by DEW. This document needs updated. It's still referencing ODE. There is a column for reporting instructions. So if we have any reporting instructions we want to share, that would be entered in here. And then it has a reference here to the USPS system, and it'll tell you where that is located. Now, we already mentioned the EMIS entry screen, so that's the easiest way to find it. But if you're going to another area in USPS, you can go right to, in this case, core and then the employee record. So that's where you'll find these elements. Okay, so there's one for demographic, and then there's another one for the employment record information. Okay, next page. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the reports. And before, well, we'll talk about that as we get in here. Okay, so from USPS, the reports drop down. The EMIS reports option has listing a couple of reports you can run that will show if there's any errors. So this is part of the checklist. And we just did a review of the initial EMIS staff reporting checklist at our roundtable last month, I believe, if I remember correctly. And that recording is out on our website. So before I go any further, I want to show you where that's located at. Okay, so if I come back over here, let's go back over here. So on our Fiscal Services State Software page, in that document section, we have a roundtable discussions area. And if we go to USPS folder, just double click that to open up, maybe. It's moving on me for some reason. There we go. Okay, so it's in date order, and you can see the format we're using. I'm going to click this date modified to change the order. Okay, so you can see September 9. Okay, so it was more recent than I was thinking. So September 9 is when we covered the EMIS initial staff checklist. So again, you can download the recording and then go ahead and watch that if you missed that. So that was a good review of the checklist. So everybody should be reviewing this checklist now. Okay, as soon as the reporting period opens, we do a review of the checklist for each reporting window, and we do record it out here in our roundtable discussions. So if you miss seeing that and you want a review of it, go ahead and download that recording from there. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about this report. So this is what the EMIS data collection reports screen looks like when you select it. And just to show you again, if I go over to my demo account, okay, I'm back in my user that has the group manager access. So for them, they're going to see a lot of reports in the list. So you're looking for the EMIS reports and then the EMIS data collection. Okay, and that's that same screenshot. You can sort it by employee number or name. PDF is the default. That's what most people use, but you can change it if you want. All you do is click to generate each one of these. And then all you're looking for is if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, it will tell you at the bottom how many errors it finds. Hopefully it'll say 0. And if it does, you're good to go. You can review the reports too because it will list the employees that are going to be reported to EMIS. So you can kind of glance through it and check to see if it looks correct. If you do find errors on the report, let me get back to the document here. Okay, what you're going to see, so this is for each report. This is the employee report. This is the position report. The error is always going to be the same on each report. So on the employee report, it's always going to say this. Okay, error. The employee will not be reported to EMIS. An error occurred while gathering EMIS data. Please contact your ITC. So if you run these reports, you're seeing errors, let us know. And then there's a special program. It's actually a debug program that we run in order to find out what the exact error is. In most cases for employee report, the most common error I see has to do with hours per day. So for the USPS users, when you're creating compensation records, we highly recommend you enter in an hours per day value, even if you just have to guess, even if the employee may not be working the same number of hours every day. Just put something in if they are reportable to EMIS. Okay, that helps to avoid this error. That's the most common one I see there. The position report will always have this error. So again, you just have to contact us and then we can run that debug program to find what the exact error is. I don't see errors on this one too often. I don't know if anybody on my team does. So I'm not sure what might pop up for that one. If I've had one, I haven't had it in a long time. So just let us know if you see any errors and we can tell you what those are exactly. Okay, and then for each of these, it does list the criteria for the report, so it tells you what it's looking at uh, to pull employees onto that report. Okay, and this last paragraph at the bottom of page 3, this is for the position report. It's just letting you know that when you run the report, there is a column that lists the position number. And so, for example, if you assign your employee position 1, it might just say 1, or it might say 1A or 1B. So if you see a letter next to it, that means a collection has been run against their data, and that's what assigns the letter to it. That just automatically happens through the data collector. If there is no letter next to it, that means that that information has never been pulled into the data collector yet. Okay, so when it is included, it'll include a letter next to it. Okay, custom reports. Okay, so this is the section I just changed the other day. Okay, I was reading through this and it's like, well, it should probably be updated. So, Meta Solutions created a report, a custom report called All EMIS Related Fields Report. The SSDT took that report and they now have it available on their on the USPS webpage. So if I go back to my demo account here, if I click on reports and go back to the EMIS reports option, this is where you'll see that EMIS data extract report. Okay, so this is the same report, but now it's available right from the reports menu. You can change the name of it. You can change the format if you want. sort how you want. This one is marked by default, I believe. Let me actually click default up here. Okay. Yeah, the default is by employee number here, but you can change it to name if you prefer. This is marked include only records that are reportable to EMIS, so you can toggle these on and off. The EMIS fiscal year is set to 2026, but you can see all the other options. So you can run this report however you want. If you're looking for specific groups or something, you can do specific employees, pay groups, certain position codes. I'm going to go ahead and just generate it just so you can see what it looks like. In my demo account, I don't have a lot of employees on the list that are reportable to EMIS. So mine's kind of small, but I'm going to open it. Mine's going to open in Excel. Okay. So this is a really nice report because it has everything that's reportable to EMIS, plus a few extra fields that you might find handy to do some filtering on. So when I open up the CSV file in Excel, it's kind of all squished together. So I'm going to click over here and I'm just going to expand all the columns. Uh, but if you've never used this report, a lot of districts have used it and they really like it. It's a great way to review your data for what's going to be reported to EMIS. So when you look at this spreadsheet, what you're going to see here in column A is the employee report to EMIS flag. So this tells you if it's true, then the employee record is marked reportable to EMIS. If it's false, it's not. It has the employee number, their name, their credential ID, if they have a non-certificate ID, if they have an EMIS ID, gender, birth date. So all these are EMIS report, or most of them are EMIS reportable fields. Okay. If I keep scrolling over, so again, you'll see other fields here that are reportable. And then you'll notice over here, I have another report to EMIS. But this one's for a position. So this is the employee's position record. So anything after this are fields that are coming from the employee's position record. Okay, so again, I'm going to keep scrolling here. So you can see the fields that are available. Here's the EMIS position code, position status, okay, pay group. Again, that's not reportable to EMIS, but that could be handy for you to have in the spreadsheet. EMIS position hire date, position start. Okay, so appointment type, FTE. Let me keep going here. Assignment area. Here's your separation date and reason if it applies. Okay, now as I get to these fields here, okay, you'll notice there's an EMIS override contract amount, EMIS override contract workdays. We're going to talk more about those override fields. But I will let you know that by default, that EMIS override wording is not on that field. So if we did not add that for your district and you run this, it's just going to say contract amount, contract workdays, hours and day. If you like that EMIS override wording, which I do because it makes it real clear that that is an override field, we can add that for you. And I think we mentioned it a couple more times in the document that we're looking at. So, if you're interested in that, let us know. Okay. Then you'll notice there's this column here for compensation report to EMIS. So remember when we were talking about the EMIS entry screen, that does not have compensation information available on it yet. So if you run this report, then you can get that information on the report. So again, these are EMIS reportable fields, plus maybe a few extra fields that are coming from the employee's compensation record. Okay, so as I'll scroll through, you'll see all those different fields available on the spreadsheet. So especially if you're used to using spreadsheets for data, this can be really handy to do different filtering, run it different ways. You could find a lot of information to help you make sure your information is correct and that you are reporting the correct records. Okay, so a lot of good uses for this. Highly recommended. Okay. All right, let me see what else I had to mention here. Okay, yeah, so I talked about that. Okay, so something to keep in mind about this report, though, what was nice about the custom report that we originally created and have available, and some of you may still have it in your report manager area, and you can actually still download our custom report if you want. But the nice thing about it is you would be able to create a report bundle. So, for example, if your EMIS coordinator does not have access to the EMIS entry screen to USPS at all, and you want to be able to send that spreadsheet of information to them for them to maybe you're reviewing the information together. You can actually set up a report bundle, or you can even set it up to send it to yourself to check periodically. So you could create a report bundle to have it automatically send you the report through email on a specific schedule. Unfortunately, you can't do that yet with the SSDT's version. So this paragraph talks about that. So if you run this report and you're like, yeah, I would like to set that up in a report bundle and send it to myself and or my EMIS coordinator or whoever else you might need to review it. Um, if you're interested in that option, please send an email to redesignhelp@metasolutions.net to make that request. Because then what we'll do when we get that request is we'll let the SSTT know, and they will increase the number of times that request has been asked for. And the more times it's requested, the higher it bumps up to being implemented within the software. Okay, so keep that in mind if you start running that report and you're like, yeah, I would really like to be able to schedule it so that it just automatically sends it. Okay, let us know if you're interested in that option and we'll put in those requests. Okay, there are a bunch of SSDT custom reports that can help you with EMIS staff reporting as well. Several of them are mentioned on the staff and course L collection checklist. If I click on this link here, that will take you directly to that checklist. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So this is where we refer you whenever a new collection opens for staff. So you'll want to go ahead and review that. So again, we did a roundtable on that just recently. You can review the recording. So it covered the initial staff and course collection. So if you have not started going through this checklist, so this is something that the USPS user should do. So if you haven't started on it, please start looking at that and reviewing it. It has a lot of good tips on things to look for. There's a lot of detail in here. Um, there's certain mass change definitions that can be used, things like that. Okay, so that's a link directly to the checklist. Okay, and within that checklist, it does mention some of these reports, and these are custom reports. So if you haven't used these before and you're interested in using them, you can actually click the link for the report on the checklist. It'll download to your computer. And then all you have to do is import it into Report Manager, and then you can use it from there. So they mentioned this one here, and then further down in the checklist, they mention all of these as well. So again, you can get those directly from the checklist. You can also get them from the shared library, which I added that here. It actually ended up on the top of the next page. So the SSDT has a public shared USPS reports library, and they have an EMIS related reports section. If I click on this link, it'll take you right to that section. Okay, I have to scroll up just a little bit to see the heading. So these are all the EMIS related reports. So some of the reports I just mentioned that are in the checklist, you can also get those from here. But then there's some additional ones, and it gives you a description of what the reports have in them. So it gives you an idea. So again, if you want to try any of these and you don't already have them in your report manager, you could just click the name to download it and then load it or import it into report manager to use. Okay, so you have a lot of options for reports. Okay, additionally, there is another ITC in the state, NOASC is how we refer to them. They shared their custom reports with us, so you can click this link. And there are a few reports listed here that you might find helpful for your EMIS reporting. So if you want to take a look at any of those, Again, same thing. You just click it to download it and load it into Report Manager. Okay, this next section talks about the FY26 EMIS manual. So there's a link here, so that will take you directly to the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce webpage. And what you're looking for, so for your staff reporting, there's a lot of information available in their EMIS manual, and that's what we look at and refer to a lot. And a lot of the information in this particular document came directly from their manual as well, and we just expanded on some of the information. So you're looking for their section 3 for all of the staff record information. And then we also refer you to section 4.7 for subject codes, for valid subject codes. So there's screenshots of what those look like here. But if I actually click on this link here to go to their website, you can click on topics here, and you can either go to data or go directly to EMIS. That would be a little bit quicker. And if I scroll down, oops, sorry, the EMIS manual is right here in the documentation section. I want to point out that their data collection calendar, so if you want to double check the dates of the reporting period, you would click on that to look at it. So if we go to the EMIS manual, though, it'll take you to this section. If you scroll down a little bit, it has links to all the different sections. So the main one you're going to want to look at is the staff records. And then, of course, you'll want to select, they have last year's and this year's out there. Of course, you'll want to look at the most current version. So you'll want to click any of these links for FY26. So if you need more information about demographic record information, click this link here, and then it'll open up a PDF with that information. Okay. So good information there. Some other general information about your staff records. These are the different record number references for the data that's reported. So whenever we talk about CI records, that's your staff demographic record. So in USPS, that's your employee record information. CK is the staff employment record. In USPS, that's the data that comes from the position and compensation record for the employee. Then from the EMIS entry screen, that's where you can create your CJ and CC records. So those are contract records. The EMIS FFE, sometimes you'll hear us refer to that, that's the flat file editor. If you ever need to do a override record for staff, there's a CP and CL that can be created in the flat file editor. I know at some point DEW is moving to allow just specific CSV formatted files to be loaded directly into the data collector. I'm just now seeing that on the financial side of things, the fiscal. So hopefully they'll have that available sometime soon. If it's coming soon, I haven't really heard about it. But right now, those records, I believe, are still created through the flat file editor. So you do need access to do that. And then from the student data software, the CU or course master record comes from the student side. The who to report, who not to report, that comes right out of the DEW EMIS manual. So that was just copied and pasted in here. So if you have any questions about who to report and who not to report, this is where they're listed. DEW staff reporting changes. So there is a link on their webpage for EMIS changes. So if you want to check that to see if something's going to be updated for staff reporting, it would be listed in there. I try to check that at least once a year. Okay, so now we get into specific examples of how to do reporting for different situations. And by the way, we will take a break here in a little bit. So let me get through a few more pages and we'll take a short break. Okay, so this section of the document talks about reporting staff transferred to a new position in the district. So if you have an employee that's working in a certain position and then a month or two into the new year, they switch to a different position. If their position code is changing, you have to report the original record with a separation date and reason. Okay, and the specific example here is the old position and compensation should be reported with a separation date and separation reason of it's a code 8, which is employee accepted new position within the district. The actual status for the position will remain what it was. So most of the time that's a C for active continuing employee. So you don't want to change that. Just put a separation date and reason. You're going to report that for the rest of the reporting year. And then you have to create a new position and compensation record then to report the new position, because now you're reporting a new position code. Okay. So keep in mind this situation also applies if you have a teacher whose assignment area has changed. So if they're going from a regular teacher to special ed, then because of that assignment area change, you're going to report the original record with a separation date and reason, and then report a new one for the new assignment area. We get questions a lot about IRN. Well, what if the IRN changed? Now, if that's the only thing that changes, you could do that same reporting if you want. Um, in the EMIS manual, it gives you the option of doing it this same way. Or if it's only building IRN, they do give you the option of just changing the IRN on their current record. Okay. So if you have a preference on how you want to report it, you can do either of those methods, but you don't have to report two separate records if it's only the building IRN that's changing. Okay. And then some of this information here is when we or somebody else has sent a ticket to DEW with certain questions. So a lot of times we put Q&As on here from DEW just to kind of reinforce what we're trying to tell you in these particular sections. Okay, so these just kind of reinforce what we told you up above. Okay. Um, this note at the bottom, okay, keep in mind if you accidentally reported an incorrect position for somebody, now if it's in the first reporting window, so let's say this is a new employee you set up for this year, and you're in the first reporting window, and you've submitted some data to DEW in this reporting period, and you're like, oh shoot, I put in the wrong position code. If it's still in the first reporting window, you're okay to just go ahead and change that position code. However, if you don't notice it until you're in the next reporting window, then you are going to have to use this method with the separation date and reason, and then the new position code reported on a different position. Okay, so keep in mind the timing is very important if it was something that was accidentally entered incorrectly. Okay, and this gives specific examples. So it actually shows you screenshots of the employee records of where you would update the fields. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of these for all of our options unless somebody really wants me to, but I'm going to just run through it real quick on this one. So this is a specific example where you have a bus driver. They decided to switch jobs to cafeteria effective November 1 of 2021. The current position record, which is the bus driver position, position code 704, would need to be updated with a separation date and reason of 8. The separation date will be October 31 because that's the last day they worked in the bus driver position. So hopefully you can see it. It might be a little bit blurry for you, but this is position 1. This is for the bus driver. It is reportable to EMIS. You want to continue reporting it for the fiscal year. Position code 704. You want to leave the position status as is, so it's C, active continuing. But it has the separation reason with that 8, employee accepted a new position in the district, and the separation date of 10/31/21. Then you have to create a new position and compensation record for the cafeteria position. So in this case, it's position 2 for cafeteria. You'll put in the hire date, the first day they worked in that position, so it's November 1 of 21. This record is reportable to EMIS. Position code is 904 for food service assignment. Position status is active continuing. And of course, you won't put anything for separation date and reason. But something else to keep in mind for USPS users, When you have this situation, in this example for that bus driver, we highly recommend that you go to their compensation record for the bus driver position and also enter a calendar stop date that's equal to the last day they worked in that position. Okay, that just helps prevent any additional attendance days from getting reported for the employee because it should only be reporting attendance days now for the cafeteria after that date. Okay. This next page is a flow chart that I think a lot of people have found to be helpful. And I do see a question that just popped in. Hire date. Yes. So now keep in mind there's two different hire dates. So the question is, did I understand correctly that the hire date is the first day working, not the date hired by the board? For EMIS reporting, that is correct. Um, so how I think about it, and let me know if this is an issue, but I don't think it is. Sorry. There we go. Okay, let me get back to my demo account here. So if I go to an employee record, let's just pick somebody here. All right. Now on the employee record, there is a hire date in there. Okay, so the hire date in here is not reportable to EMIS. There we go. So you got the hire date here. So that's hire date for the employee, right? You have a separate hire date for the position. Okay, and this is reportable to EMIS. Okay, so if they're in a new position for this record, this is where we recommend you put in the first day they work for the hire date. If it's reportable to EMIS, that should reflect the first day they worked in that position. There is a start date field over here. Typically, those dates are the same, but they could be different. This start date is not reported to EMIS, but the hire date is. Okay. If that causes some kind of issue for your district doing that way, let us know. But as far as I know, I haven't heard of any issues with that. Okay, so this flow chart. Okay, so this comes into play. Unfortunately, this happens a lot. Okay, you have an employee that retired or resigned the previous school year, but you didn't find out about it until this school year. And if you catch it before the prior year's EMIS reporting closes, you can get that separation date in there and reported, and then, you'll be good. But that doesn't always happen, right? A lot of times you don't find out till a lot later. The previous year's close, so now you can't report that separation date and reason. So you can use this flow chart to help you determine how to report them. And in the following pages after this, we have specific examples of all of the different scenarios with screenshots too. Um, so you start right here in the upper left corner. So job was reported in a prior year final collection. Was it reported with a separation date and reason? If it was, great. That's the ideal situation. So if that's the case, then for that job, so that position and compensation record, oops, sorry, you can mark those EMIS report. No, you can unmark the reportable field on those records. Then it asks, does the employee have other jobs they retired or resigned from last school year? So, sometimes they might have multiple jobs. So if they're not working in any of them, a separation date and reason was reported, you're good to go to just turn them off for reporting. If they don't have any other positions to report to EMIS, then you would follow this here. So if they don't have any other positions to report, turn off their employee record as well for EMIS reporting. But if they do have another position, you want to leave that on and make sure those other positions are being reported. Okay. Otherwise, and this is what happens a lot, okay, the separation date and reason did not get reported that prior year. So now you have to think about, okay, what was the separation date for the employee? Was it less than or equal to the last day of school? And keep in mind that last day is based on what's reported on your DL record. So it goes by the building IRN and what's reported for the last day of school for that building. So, and again, by separation date, we mean what was the last day they worked in that position. Okay. Is it less than or equal to the last day of school? If it is, then you can go ahead and mark them not reportable to EMIS. That should cause them to go on the staff missing report, and you can do an override request then, which is the CP override. Um, if they separated after the last day of school, then the question is, did they work any days during the summer? So anytime after June 30. Um, if they did, then you need to continue reporting them, because if they worked at all this current fiscal year, then they're going to have attendance that's going to be reported. So you want to continue reporting them. However, if not, you actually have two options. You can report them with position status of you that says they're no longer working with the district, and then you have to continue reporting them for the whole year. Or you can turn them off for reporting. They'll show up on staff missing, but we can do an override request for the CL record. Okay, and that's all driven by, when was their last day they worked. I see a question. Where would you record the employee's board-approved hire date? Um, okay, so if you're talking about a specific position, so if it's a new position and you want that hire date for when the board approved it, fiscal team, do you have any recommendations? I don't know that I've ever really been asked that. Um, So if somebody knows, what would be recommended, I don't know if you could just use that start date because that's not reportable to EMIS. I don't know how much it really matters. I guess we can check into that more. So you might want to, you know, contact our team about that directly, and we can look at that unless somebody else knows and can chime in. And then I do see another question by summer. Do you mean after June 30? I do. I do. So we're talking into the new fiscal year. So when we're talking about did they work during the summer, we're really talking about after June 30. Okay, because now they're working days in the new year. So that really should be reported. So now they have attendance for the new year. Okay. Okay. So hopefully you find this helpful. I think it kind of helps you go through to figure out what to do. But like I said, we do have specific examples on the pages after this. Okay, and here, what to use for separation date. Okay, there's always been a lot of confusion about what to use, but it ends up being last day of work for the position. That's what the separation date should be. Okay. Okay, so now we start getting into all of the different scenarios specifically. Um, I really don't want to go into all of this detail because this would probably take up the rest of our time for this meeting. So unless somebody wants me to review any of these specific scenarios, I'm just going to kind of skip through these. So all of these scenarios have to do with you have an employee that retired or resigned last school year. This particular scenario on this page is the separation date and reason were reported in the final year collection. So that's the ideal situation, right? So it tells you what to do with their record if that's their situation. Okay, and I'm going to scroll through these other scenarios and then we'll take a break. So this one, the separation date and reason were not reported in that final collection. Separation date is equal to or less than the last day of school. Okay, so again, it has all the details, gives you two different options on how to report them. Okay, and then it gives you specific examples of what to update on their records in USPS. Okay. Next one, separation date and reason were not reported in the prior year. Separation date is greater than last day of school. So again, two different options, specific example with screenshots. And this one is the same as the last one with an exception. So this is where if the employee worked any days after June 30 of the previous year. So again, you have attendance to report. So that should be reported for this current EMIS reporting period then. So you want to continue reporting them. Okay. And this is for staff who leave employment during the school year. Please remember, as soon as you know that, put in that separation date and reason. Do not report them with position status U. Their position status should remain whatever it is that you've been reporting all year. Usually that's active continuing. Okay, and that's it. So we're going to stop here. Let's take a 10-minute break. Um, so let's see, what time is it? Make sure I know where we're at. So I have 10:10. So let's come back at 10:20 and we'll see how far we can get through the rest of the document. Okay, so I'm going to pause the recording and we'll see you all soon. Okay, everybody, I have 10:20 on my clock, so I'm going to go ahead and start the recording again. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. Okay, everybody, we're back. Make sure it is recording. Yes, I think it is. Yep, looks like it. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, so I do see a question in chat from oh, okay. Actually, I do see an answer I missed earlier. So somebody did put in the chat. Okay, so when somebody asked, where would you record the employee's board approved hire date? Uh, Casey on our team replied, the board approved hire can be entered into the employee hire date field on the employee record. Okay, so hopefully that answers that question. If you still have a question about that, just let us know. Then another question did come in on the example of bus driver moved to cafeteria worker. Could you change the bus driver to be number 2 and then position 1 so that number 1 is the new current position number? Yes, absolutely, you can do that. And somebody else chimed in that they do that. They like the current position to be number 1. And actually, I think our team does still recommend that. I know I recommended that to somebody recently because they were just putting in whatever position number, and that was that employee's primary job. But there are certain reports in USPS where it only pulls position 1 record information, and I think the one they were running that did that, I think, is the year-to-date report, maybe, if I remember correctly. So that would be a reason to put whatever their primary job is, assign it to job number 1. So a lot of schools do that, and I do still recommend it because, of the limitation on some reports looking only at position 1. So you can absolutely do that. Okay, so continuing on with our document. So this next section talks about rehired retiree situations. So these are all Q&As that we had with DEW about those situations. So if you run into a rehired retiree and you want to double check on how to report them, you can reference this section of the document. Okay, I'm not going to go through the scenarios. You can read through those. Leave of absence. Okay, this is a fun one that districts get every now and then. So there is a position status element for leave of absence. Okay, but um, so when you have, so this is directly from the DEW EMIS manual. Okay, if the individual was employed by the district during the previous year but was on granted leave of absence, it doesn't matter if the employee is being paid while they're on leave. If a staff member has any attendance to report for a school year before going on leave, you do not want to update that position status in that first year of leave. Okay, so if you have somebody working for your district and then today they're granted a leave of absence, you continue reporting them as is, so you don't change the position status. You just leave that on there as probably, like I said, in most situations, it's active continuing for the position status. Um, but if that staff member's leave extends into the second year, then that's when you report them with the leave of absence position status. Okay, and then more information from DEW about it here. So if a teacher is out for a period of time, a sub is in their place. They said to go ahead and report the sub for that time. There is a section in the DEW EMIS manual in section 3.1 about reporting subs when they become the teacher of record. And then here's a Q&A with DEW. This came up a couple years ago for a district. You still have to report their contract amount. So if you code an employee on leave of absence on that second year, you do want to report their contract amount. So you'll want to make sure that the compensation record in USPS will be included in the reporting. So remember, you might have to update that compensation start date and then make sure it has an updated salary listed on that record as well. So even though they're not being paid, they're not at the district because they're on leave of absence, you still want that information updated for what they would have gotten had they come back. Okay. And there's a note here. Remember, you have those three different areas in USPS where you're reporting information for an employee. So make sure the employee position and compensation records are reportable to EMIS. Okay. Okay, here's a suggestion we had from a participant from a meeting we did back in 2024. So for their leave of absence, they actually set up a non-contract compensation record and enter the value to report in the position record override fields. And again, we'll talk about those override fields here in a little bit. Also, make the job status on the position record inactive to prevent the USPS system from automatically pulling in the record for payroll processing. Okay, so a couple little tips for you for the USPS people. Okay, you can see this is in green, so we added this year. So this was a DEW EMIS ticket. This was back from 2018, but still it lists, how to report for leave of absence. So in this one, they had two people that were on leave of absence for almost 2 years, and now they've resigned. They had been reported with position P. But now that they've resigned, the EMIS manual states they should be reported with status of U, and they're just wanting to verify that that is correct. So DEW response was they shouldn't report a date. Remember, these dates are old. Okay. So they don't want to report the old date, but should report a date that is after the last calendar school year end date from the prior year. Okay, so again, they're kind of referencing old dates, but I think you get the idea. Okay, so hopefully that information is helpful. But, as always, if you have any other questions, because sometimes this information is clear as mud, so if you need additional clarification, and we can always send your specific scenarios up to EMIS, up to DEW, and see what their opinion is on your specific situation. Okay, archiving employees. So this is specific for the USPS users. Okay, you can archive employees in your files, and what that does is if you archive the employee record, all of their corresponding records will no longer show up when you go to those grids where it shows their records, unless you mark the button that says include archived. So if you want to kind of clean up your grids so there's not as much noise, you can archive employees. And this shows you two ways you can do that. So you can do that on the employee grid, or if you directly go into an employee's record, you can edit it and mark the employee archived button. Okay. And then in order to see them again, here's an example of that include archived button on the employee grid. Okay, but then you'll notice right below that, caution should be used when archiving employees. This should only be done if the employee does not have any jobs that need to be reported to EMIS and the employee is not being paid during the STRS advance. If you conceal an employee too soon, it could cause them to appear on staff missing. Okay, so keep in mind the timing. If you have employees that haven't worked for years, you're probably safe to go ahead and archive them if you want. Okay, you don't have to do it, but like I said, it helps to clean up your grid if you do that. Okay. And as far as the EMIS data collector, or some of you refer to it as SIFWorks, if you have an employee that is archived, then, like I said, the corresponding records, so that includes the position compensations. Um, so it knows not to look for any of those corresponding records. Okay. So if you mark the employee as archived, if you go and actually pull up their position and compensation record, those won't actually be marked archived. But because the employee record is archived, the systems just know well, that means all of the corresponding records should be archived. So it doesn't actually mark them, but it prevents them from showing up on the grid, and it will prevent them from being reported in EMIS reporting. Okay. Mass change. Okay, so on the compensation records in USPS, okay, so every year you're creating new compensation records for the employee's new contract. So we highly recommend that you mass update both the reportable to EMIS and archive their old compensation records to get them off of the grid. Okay, and the reason we have you unmark them for reportable to EMIS is just in case they accidentally get activated again or unarchived for some reason. That just ensures they don't get accidentally reported for some reason. It's probably not likely because of the dates on the records. Um, but you can do both if you want, or at the very least, just at least archive them. Okay. I think I saw something pop in. According to the last paragraph on page 20, even if the employee is archived, if the report to EMIS flag is true, they will be included. I mentioned they will not be included. Okay, let me look at that again. Sometimes I skim through it a little too fast, so let's see. Okay, so let's look through it to make sure I told you guys right. If the employee is archived, the employee and position compensations will not be included, even if the compensation is not marked. Okay, yeah. So even if the compensation record itself is not marked as archived, if the employee is archived, the position and compensations won't be included. Marking the employee as archived keeps everything from being in the collection for the employee. If an individual compensation is marked as archived, but the employee is not archived, then the compensation will not be included because that record is archived. Okay, yes, but the employee will be included, providing the report to EMIS flag is true. So yeah, that last sentence is so what we're doing here for mass change on the compensation records. So, like I said, you're creating new records for them every year. So you'll want to go ahead and archive the old records just to clean them up off your screen and also to prevent them from being reported, which they should anyway because of their dates most likely. Um, so if you're marking the compensation record as if you're archiving it, that record will not be reported to EMIS. But if the employee is still being marked reportable to EMIS, the employee record will still be uh, pulled into the data collector. Okay, so if you have a situation where that employee is not getting a new contract record for the new year, then you probably should be um, archiving the employee or marking that employee record not reportable so it doesn't try and pull it in with no corresponding position and compensation records. So I hope that made sense and helped. If not, let me know or reach out to somebody on our team to help clarify. Okay, I think I see another question. Even though archive via mass change is on page 1 of the EMIS checklist, should we probably wait until after January 28 to do this step so that those separating service at the end of 24-25 school year are reported in L? Okay, I see where you're going with that. So let me think about this. Um, so typically we recommend, okay, so remember the archiving we're recommending, um, that's primarily for your employees that have a new contract record for the new school year. So it's a returning employee and you're giving a new compensation record, so we just recommend archiving the old compensation record. However, to your question, um, so if you have somebody that separated the previous school year, but you still need to report them this year for whatever reason. So maybe you're going to report them for the full year with the position status of you. Then you're correct. You do not want to archive those records or make them not reportable because you do want them reported for the full year. So that is correct. So I hope that helped to answer that question. Hopefully I didn't make it more confusing. Sometimes that happens with the EMIS reporting stuff. It can get kind of confusing. It does help. Great. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, great question. Thank you for asking it. Okay, so that's primarily what this is about. And like it was mentioned in chat, this is part of the checklist. So we do recommend, if you haven't archived um, your previous year's compensation records for your employees, we highly recommend going ahead and doing that. But as was mentioned in chat, just be careful of records that you do need to continue reporting for this year. Okay, so there is a mass change option. So I think most of you are probably, most of our USPS users are probably familiar with mass change. Keep in mind, you do need to be careful when you are doing mass change. There is no undo. So you have to be very careful with that. I always recommend after you filter your grid for the records you want to update, that you go ahead and create a report, preferably in Excel field names format, because that becomes your backup then in case you overdid it or something. We should be able to recover any data needed from that spreadsheet. Fortunately, I don't think that's happened. Well, at all for me that I can recall. But as a just in case, keep that in mind. Okay, if you've never used Mass Change before, please contact our team and we can assist you with going through those steps. Okay, so there is a mass change for that for both of those options. If you want to make EMIS reporting false on the record, there's a script for that. And then there is the one to actually archive the compensation record. Okay, okay. All right, so I'm not going to go into detail on that. Full-time equivalency. Sometimes we get questions about that. So we have this section. Again, a lot of this information is directly from the DEW EMIS manual. But FTE is determined by the district. So how many hours a day does an employee have to work in a certain position for your district to consider that position full-time? Okay, so if you have an employee that meets that criteria, you're going to report them as one FTE. If they're working less than that, then you have to compare it to the hours you defined as full-time, and then do a calculation to calculate their FTE. So there are specific examples in this document. Again, that comes directly from the DEW EMIS manual. So hopefully these will help you determine what to put for the FTE. But as always, if you're just not sure of certain situations, let us know. And worst case scenario, we'll just send it to DEW and say, hey, how do you think they should be reported? Okay, so that section. And here's some specific tickets we pulled about FTE. So sometimes those examples might help you as well. There is a special ed FTE element. So again, this information was pulled from the DEW EMIS manual. So keep in mind that you're only going to report this element for a position that is directly affecting special ed students. So sometimes it's if they have a specific assignment area assigned for special ed, um, or they're just you have a specific position that's doing work with those special ed kids. Okay, so this talks about the details about how to report that, and then this is a table again from the DEW manual. It's a little blurry for some reason, but it tells you these are some common position codes where you might need to report FTE greater than 04 special ed FTE. Again, just refer to this information or directly in the DEW EMIS manual. Okay, now we're going to talk about those override fields. Okay, so on the employee's position record, there is an EMIS related information section. So I have a screenshot of it actually right down here. So this is showing the EMIS override values. I'm going to try and make that a little bit bigger. I don't know if it'll help. Maybe. Okay, so when you go to the employee's position record and go to this EMIS related information section, these arrows here are pointing to what we call override records. Okay. So basically what that means is, okay, if you fill in these fields on the employee's position record, when a collection is done for staff in the EMIS data collector, it will look for values in these fields first. Okay, so if you need to report something different for these values, that's than what is on the employee's compensation record, these will override those values. Okay. So when do you need to use these? Okay, there's specific scenarios where you might need to use these. Okay. And those are actually coming up for the specific examples. Um, but then you may remember when I showed you that extract report that went into the spreadsheet, you can actually, or we can actually help you customize the name of these fields. So I highly recommend going ahead and adding override or EMIS override as part of the name of these fields. So if you're interested in that and yours does not show that, let us know and we can update those fields for you. Um, Actually, this full-time equivalence is actually another field. This will override that FTE field that's actually on the position record. So it's actually, let me actually show it to you over in my demo. Let me see if my demo is still working. Okay, here, I'm actually on positions. Nope, waited too long. I probably have to log in again. Nope, maybe not. Great. Okay. So let me look at this position record. Okay, so in USPS on the employee's actual position record, you'll notice there is an FTE field up here at the top. Okay, so this is the value that will be reported when a collection is done, unless you have a value down here. Okay, it looks in this field first. If there's a value here, this is what it reports. If not, it's going to go and look in this field and pick up this value. Okay, so again, some people put the same value in both places. That's fine, you can do that. It doesn't hurt anything, but it's not really necessary. Same with these fields. Sometimes you can see on mine, I do have EMIS override in these files, so we've relabeled these fields. We could do the same for this one if you want. Um, but this clearly identifies these as override fields then. So again, if there's a value here, this is what'll get reported. If there's nothing here, in this case, these fields, excuse me, will look at the employee's compensation record values to report these. Okay. So let me go back to the document here. Okay, so that's oh, and here's the original values. So this is an example of the compensation record for the employee. So again, if these fields on the position record for override are not filled in, it's going to look at the compensation record and it'll find those values on that record to report. Okay, and then, oh, I did have that on here, sorry. So here's the original FTE field on the position record. This would be the override one under the EMIS related information. Okay. We do recommend you verify these fields every year because maybe you've reported something in there the previous year for somebody, and that employee is, being reported again this year. You might need to clear out those fields so it doesn't report old data from the previous year. So I think that is on our checklist to double check those fields and make sure that um, you either clear them or update them appropriately for the new year. So this paragraph here tells you the override fields are most commonly used when an employee works in multiple buildings. So especially for larger districts, so maybe you have two different middle schools and you have a middle school teacher that spends part of their time in both buildings. That is an example of reporting multiple staff employment records, and we have a section in this document with more details on how to do that reporting if you have that situation. And that is a perfect example of when you would use these override fields. And here's the tip about relabeling those fields with EMIS override. So let us know if you want us to do that for your files. Okay, and then this page goes in more detail about each of the override fields. So for the hours per day field, what you need to report to DEW for hours per day would be normal hours in a day that exclude unpaid lunch. Okay, so for example, down here, an employee is scheduled to work 7 hours, and that includes a half-hour paid lunch. If it's a paid lunch, you would want to report the full 7 days. If the employee has half an hour unpaid lunch, then you actually need to report 6.5 hours per day to EMIS. Okay. So if you have 7 hours on the compensation record, but they have half-hour unpaid lunch, you could use that override field for hours per day to report the 6.5. So that's an example of that one. For the contract amount, for the first collection for reporting, you just want to report whatever the salary is during that time frame. So again, if you're doing an increase in pay during the first reporting window, make sure you get that updated in USPS. Let your EMIS coordinator know there's been an update for staff, and then they can do a collection and pick that up and get it reported to DEW. For the final collection, the salary you report should be what they were paid as of the end of the school year. So again, if you have somebody that resigned, retired, excuse me, then you might have to update the salary for what they actually were paid during the school year. So again, if that's updated in USPS, let your EMIS coordinator know to collect on that. And then the contract amount, that actually should be split out if you have the reporting an employee in multiple buildings for the same position. So again, that's detailed in that section of the document. The workdays reported, that should be the actual number of days they worked for the contract year. And then, of course, the FTE. Okay, and again, if you're doing multiple buildings for the same position, that will be different and split out. Mid-year contract change. If in USPS you're doing a mid-year contract change for an employee, keep in mind, depending on how that is done and what the record looks like for their compensation record, you may need to update those override fields to report a different value than what's on the compensation record. So if you have mid-year contract change, just keep that in mind. Is what's on the compensation record correct for reporting to EMIS? If not, that would be a situation where you may need to use an override field. And this note here, we do have a mass load option. If you have a lot of positions that need to have different values, that could be loaded in through a spreadsheet if you have a bunch of them. So you do have that option. I think I see something in chat. Okay, we have 5.9 hours per day for the majority of our aides, and they didn't show up on the EMIS report with an error. So is it pulling 5.9 even if it's not to the nearest quarter hour? Well, that's a good question. Is without looking in the data collector, I would assume so. Does anybody on in the meeting know for sure? I'm assuming it's okay. Let me look here. Let me go back up to the hours per day area here. To report hours minus lunch, it says report to the nearest quarter hour. Yeah, I don't know. We'd have to actually look at that. So you could actually, in the data collector, if you pull the if you pull the employment record out of the data collector, it will actually show you what's being reported in there for hours per day. So I'm assuming it is pulling the full 5.9, but without looking at that, I don't know for certain. So if you have somebody that can pull that out of the data collector and look at it, that's how you can verify what's being reported. Okay, so this is the section about reporting multiple staff employment records. So if you have that situation where you have an employee in one specific position code, but they're splitting their time between multiple buildings, this is when you'll want to go through these instructions. So I'm just going to go through the bullet points here, but there's specific example of how to set that up in USPS in here. So, if you have any questions about that, again, let us know if you need any help with this, if you have that situation. Okay, so you want to report an employment record for each building. So each record will have a different building IRN to represent each building that they're in. You're going to be using the same position code for each position. The local contract code, again, that's terminology in EMIS, that's referring to the employee's position number in USPS. So that number is going to be different for each record you're reporting because you're going to set up a different position and compensation record for each building. The position FTE needs to represent the proportion of time spent in each building. So if they're splitting their time 50-50, each record will have 0.5 FTE. The scheduled work days should be the same for each record. The FTE value will actually break this down when it gets reported. The contract annual salary amount should be split in proportion to the FTE for the position. So the system won't automatically do that split, so you do have to split that out yourself between the records. Hours per day, that will be the same for each record. And then don't forget to add the corresponding compensation record for each position record reportable to EMIS. Okay, and then here's some more Q&A stuff with DEW to confirm how to do some of this. And then here's a specific example showing you how to set up the records. Okay. One thing I will point out on here for those of you in USPS, only one of the records is probably going to be active unless you're going to pay on both compensation records. If you're going to split it out and pay on both, you can do that, but most districts are only going to pay off of one record, and the other record is only going to be there for EMIS reporting. Okay, so this example is showing one is active for job status because you're going to pay on that one. And then the other record is going to be inactive, so you're not going to actually pay anything against it. Okay, you can do it either way, whatever you prefer. But this is most typically how it's set up. Okay, the next section goes over race and ethnicity data requirements. I think these links still work. So if you have any questions, you can look over this information on reporting for those fields. So this information is in the employee record, so that's where you'll find those fields to fill in. And here's a link to the SSDT's employee record documentation, and that provides additional detail for those fields. We copied and pasted those here so you can see that information, but you can refer back to this document as well. Okay, our next fun topic, long-term illness days. We always get questions about long-term illness. So a long-term illness, when you report it to through EMIS to DEW, that has to be 15 consecutive workdays or more. Okay, the employee can be on disability, they can be paid, unpaid, they could be on family leave. Any of those situations where it's 15 consecutive days or more should be reported as long-term illness. If the employee missed just a partial day from their scheduled workday, you cannot count that as LTI. That actually breaks the consecutive days. Okay, so it has to be consecutive. If they're granted a non-medical leave, that is not long-term illness. Okay, if a staff member has multiple long-term illnesses in the school year, you have to add those together. So for example, a staff member is absent 16 consecutive days in October, and then another 19 consecutive days in February. You're going to report 35 combined long-term illness days. Holidays do not break consecutive days because the district's closed just like the weekends, so it's not counted at all. If you have a non-duty day, such as an in-service where the employee is expected to attend, if they do not attend, that does get counted as their long-term illness day. If they do attend, though, that breaks the consecutive days count. Okay. The total absence days reported should not be less than the long-term illness days you're reporting. Okay, those are two separate reporting elements. So you have absence days and then you have long-term illness. Long-term illness is actually a subset of the absence days. So absence days has to either be equal to or greater than the long-term illness days that are reported. If they're not, you're going to see an error. Okay, entries in USPS. Okay, so we get a lot of questions about, well, how do I track this to keep track of it? Probably the easiest way in USPS to do that is as soon as you're finding employees that are meeting long-term illness, maybe they're taking sick leave. So as soon as you see they're meeting that 15 consecutive days, you can use the subcategory field on the absences, and it's a user defined field, which means you can make that value whatever you want it to be. So you could put in an LT, LTI, you can actually spell out long-term illness in that subcategory field. Okay. And then you'll see in this example, so let's say they've used all their sick leave, maybe they're on unpaid leave now, but they haven't terminated employment, so you still have to report it. So what you can do in USPS is you can create an absence record for the category of other, and then you can use that subcategory to record that this is for long-term illness. Okay, so what that helps you do then, if you use that subcategory field, you can either run reports on it or you can go to the absence grid or the attendance grid and filter for that subcategory. And then that's how you can get the actual count of those days. So that's just one option that you can use within the USPS software. Okay, and because remember from the grids, you can also generate a report. So once you filter for the subcategory, you can generate a report if you want and get the total. Okay, I see this question. When someone is on leave of absence, do you still accumulate a sick day? Oh, I do not know. I guess it comes down to district policy. So, for all of you districts out there, do you do accumulate sick day for somebody on leave of absence? That I don't know. I'm going to assume that's part of your district policy. Okay. Let's see. Okay, Casey chimed in. When I did payroll, if they were not being paid, they did not accrue sick leave. And somebody else said, we do. Then they use the 1.25 sick days, then go back to doc. Okay. Okay, thank you for chiming in, everybody. Okay, then at the bottom of this page, we have common question. Do doc days count toward long-term illness? So yes, if the days qualifies as long-term illness, and we do have a section about, oh, reference long-term illness Q&A section below. Okay, so if you enter a doc day in USPS, those are counted as absence days for EMIS reporting. And again, if you're also going to count it toward long-term illness, when you're recording that doc day in USPS, you can use that subcategory field and actually mark it as long-term illness. So again, that can help you with the tracking. Let's see. Okay, there's a note at the very bottom. Oops, sorry, let me get back to chat here. Okay, let's see what else is being said. I just want to repeat this just so it's on the recording for somebody that's listening to this afterward. So I do see one. Okay, so if you have a sick bank, they could borrow from it, but it still didn't accrue their sick days. Okay, so that was with Casey's first comments that when he did payroll, if they were not being paid, that they did not accrue sick leave. But he said if they had a sick bank, they could borrow from it, but still didn't accrue any days. Okay, and then somebody else chimed in with, I only accumulate if the employee has either worked or used accrued time for at least half the month. Then we have another question. Is long-term illness for all employees and not just certified? That's correct. It's, I believe, am I correct in that, everybody? I thought it was for everybody. As far as I know, it is.
Yep, reportable to EMIS, yes.
Okay, thank you. Somebody else said we do not let them accrue sick leave if they are on unpaid leave of absence. Then I see the board approved hire. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay. So is this going back to entering hire date? Board approved hire date can be entered in the employee hire date field on the employee record. I think that was from earlier, wasn't it? And then somebody said, I think sick days are required to accumulate if the staff member is on FMLA leave. Okay. All right. That's all I'm seeing so far. So thank you all for the comments. Okay. Somebody else agreed with that last one. Sick days are required to accumulate if they're on FMLA. Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Okay. At the bottom of this page, the note here. If you're not tracking the long-term illness specifically in USPS, and maybe you're tracking it a different way, that's fine. It's however you're comfortable doing that. Um, but for EMIS reporting, then what you'll want to do, so if it's not being recorded and pulled out of, and this is for the absence days, right? So just absence itself. So if you're not recording doc or other, what's called other absence records, um, the for EMIS reporting, if you are recording those records, those will actually be counted as absence days when you report to EMIS. If you're not putting those in USPS, then what you'll want to do to record the absences is go to Core Adjustments and create a record. And since I have that demo, I'll show you that real quick for the USPS users. Okay, so what you would do is use Core and then the Adjustments option. Okay, and then you'll create a record for that specific employee. Let me just grab somebody here. And then it's not associated with any specific payroll item, so you can skip that and just go down to the type field here. And then you're going to see there is an EMIS absence option. There's also one for attendance if for some reason you need to record attendance to report. But you could record EMIS absence here, put in a date within the current period or open period. Okay, I'm in September, so I can use September. It is current and open. And then in the amount field is where you'll put the number of days. So let's say there's 10 absence days I need to report. Okay, you can put a description if you want, and then just save the record. Okay, and then that will get picked up for EMIS reporting. Okay, I see something else in chat. When they are on FMLA and being docked, then they accrue their sick leave. We have them use the sick days, then go back to dock. Do you start over counting days? No. So whether the employee is using sick leave or you're docking them, as long as they are not returning to work during that period, then you would count those days for long-term illness. Okay. Yeah, fun topic, right? Everybody loves long-term illness, not. Okay. And there's more. Okay, so on the next page, so when is long-term illness reported? So it's actually only picked up by DEW during the final collection. Okay, but that doesn't mean you can't start recording it now. So if you already have somebody that's had 15 or more consecutive days of long-term illness, go ahead and record that for them. Before you do that, though, make sure you've cleared out long-term illness from the prior year. Okay. Um, and I think we have that tip in here on this document. Um, so you can clear those out either manually, there is a mass change option on the employee record for that. But then go ahead and start reporting them. So like I said, as soon as start adding it in. And then if later on that same employee, a couple months later, they take another 15 or more consecutive days, then just add that into their current long-term illness field. So you could just keep changing that as that happens. Okay, let's see. So Okay, so yeah, the safest time to start reporting long-term illness is after the new reporting year has opened. But again, make sure you clear out last year's values. Those don't automatically clear. So where is it located? So if you're going to the actual employee record, you will see that field in the state reporting section of the employee record. And we have an arrow here pointing to the long-term illness field. So you could just go in and manually enter that in once you have those days. Then we have different Q&A with DEW about long-term illness. So calamity days, that's a common one. Okay, we have a calamity day. Is that counted as long-term illness? So you have to think about, so from DEW's answer, you have to think about it's days the staff member is expected to be there. That's what you would count. So if you have a calamity day, you're not expecting your employees to be there that day, right? So kind of be like a holiday or a weekend. So you would not count that for their long-term as part of their long-term illness then. Um, so that's what that talks about. This is a newer one we added in, so you can see it's in green. So an employee is on long-term absence. The district has a paid holiday or calamity. Does that interrupt the long-term illness? Okay, so again, kind of reinforces this one. Non-work days that fall within the period of staff absence should be excluded from the count of consecutive work days for long-term illness. So again, you wouldn't count it because nobody's expected to be there for that situation or those situations. Okay, maternity leave. We had a question about that. And this kind of went back and forth. You said we had a first answer, second answer. I don't know how clear this still is. I was reading it and I'm like, I think I'm still confused. But um, so it sounds like if we go down to the bottom here, um, on here it says it depends on how they're taking the time off. If they're taking sick leave, then it obviously be enough time to fall under long-term illness. If they're taking vacation or other, in either case, they should be reported as anyone else taking such time. So it kind of sounds like it depends in that situation. So if you have somebody in this specific situation and you're not sure, again, let us know. We'll send it on to DEW to verify. And then if we can make this a little more clear than what I'm reading on it, we will definitely do that. Or if anybody's had that situation recently, please feel free to share how you reported that. Okay, so, okay, I thought this had the tip on clearing. Either I missed it or it's not on there like I thought it was. So let me go to my demo. So you remember when I was in here earlier in the employee record. Well, actually, I was in the entry screen. So you could do it here on the employee record, or you could do, well, actually, I think you do want to use the employee record for this. Okay. So for USPS users, if you need to clear long-term illness for the previous year, if that hasn't been done yet, you do have a mass, or there is a mass change option available in the employees grid. So if you don't see that option, let us know. That usually means there's just not a script in there for you to use, or maybe you don't have the correct access. But if you have Group Manager, you should see that option. So you'll just come in here, make sure the grid has, again, I don't know why social's in there. I don't really want that on there. But you will want the long-term illness field on the grid. Uh, so state reporting. So down here, I know it's in the state reporting section of that, or I thought it was. Okay, it's not. Okay, team, where is it? I love it when I can't find it. Okay, it's under staff demographic. Okay, I have long-term illness there. Okay, so what you can do is pull that field in, and then you would filter this. Now, I don't have anybody that has long-term illness in my files, but you would be looking for long-term illness greater than 0, and then that should list anybody that has long-term illness. So if you review those and it's like, oh yeah, that's from last year, what you'll want to do with that filtered on is you're going to go to mass change, And this is how it should look for you with your group manager access. It might look different if we gave you higher access, but this is how it typically looks for everybody. But there should be, here we go, clear employee long-term illness. So you'll just select that, and then it'll tell you how many records you filtered for. And when you submit it, it will zero out those values. Okay, so it's that simple. Okay, then you can go ahead and start entering them for the new year whenever you have that information. Okay, let me go back over here. Okay, any other questions about long-term illness at this point? If not, I'm going to move along. Let's see what time it is. We're running out of time fast, everybody. Okay. Reporting contracted staff. Okay, so if you have a contracted staff situation, I highly recommend starting with this table that's on this page. This, again, is coming directly from DEW's EMIS manual. It's their section 3.2 for reporting contracted staff. Okay, so this is a good starting point, looking at the charts to kind of figure out how you should be reporting them. However, we do recommend you actually look at section 3.2 of their manual to help you even more make sure you are reporting them correctly, because there are a lot more details in that document. Okay, we actually had to use it the other day for a contracted staff reporting situation to make sure we were getting it right. Okay, so the way you use this chart, though, so there's two different charts. So this first one on the top is for these specific position codes. So you have to look at the grid. So for the type of contractor, is the contractor an EMIS reporting entity? Okay, so if so you have to determine, is it a reporting entity, non-reporting entity? Are you contracting with an individual? Okay. And then it tells you, if you're the contracting district, that tells you what you report based on whether the contractor is an EMIS reporting entity or not. And then the contractor reports this information. And then for all other position codes, same thing. Contracting district, contractor, depending on what type of contractor you're dealing with. Okay, so that kind of gives you some basic guidance, but again, it's a good idea to look in the manual for more details, because there are, all kinds of different situations going on out there, as we've noticed recently. Okay, so when do you use these special records, the CC and CJ? So the contractor um, and contract only staff. Okay, sorry, I thought there was something above, but there wasn't. Okay, so again, some of this is just a repeat of previous information. So the contractor staff employment record, I think I mentioned earlier, typically we see that reported a lot for ESCs because they are contracting with teachers or other specific position codes that your district might use, and maybe you're contracting with the ESC for that staff member. So the ESC is actually paying that person, but they're coming to your school to teach or provide some kind of service for your students. Okay, so in that case, the ESC would be reporting the contractor staff employment record because they have to show that that employee is actually going to another school district to provide that service. Okay. So in that situation, someone would have to go to the EMIS entry screen, create the appropriate CJ record for the employee. Okay, so you can see here's create button. They select the employee, their position, the appropriate compensation record, and then here is where they fill in the information. The IRN will be for the IRN of the school district that they're contracting with, so where they're going to provide that service. The position code has to be entered as well as the appropriate FTE. Okay. Then again, once that information is entered and it's updated and ready to go, somebody needs to extract that data It needs to be loaded into the data collector, and then a collection needs to be done against that data. So it gets submitted. Okay. For the CC record, that one's a little bit different. So this is where you're contracting with a non-EMIS reporting entity. And the most common example is if you're contracting with a transportation company, custodial, food service. So for those types of contracts, if you have that situation, you probably need to report a CC, contract only staff record. So again, you'd go into EMIS entry, you'd select the EMIS contracted service tab, create the record, and then on the next screen here, this is all of the information that needs to be filled in. Okay. Once that information is entered in and ready to go, somebody has to extract it, load it into the data collector, and then submit it. Okay, and I think I see a question. If the ESC is paying an employee at our school, they report them. Paying an, yes, correct. So the ESC is paying as long as, and this has come up before, as long as they're not, the employee isn't an employee of a COG. There are some ESCs that are have the I don't know what the right word is. They're defined as a COG, which is a council of government. Those types of ESCs, if that's how they're employed, they do not report to EMIS. So that would then be considered a non-EMIS reporting entity. But in most cases, correct. If the ESC, if it's their employee you're contracting with, the ESC is reporting the employee. Okay. Would this be if we are contracting a personal trainer for our athletic teams? If it's an EMIS reportable position that you're contracting for, then yes, you would need to report that to DEW. If our nurses are for Premier Health, or from Premier Health, sorry, and paid by Premier Health, how or do we report them? So nurse, yes, you would report them. So now you're contracting the nurses with a non-EMIS reporting entity, Premier Health. Um, so let me go back up to the scenarios up here. I don't know what position code a nurse would be reported under offhand. But so depending on, so again, I tell you to go to this chart and also look in the document from DEW as well. So I don't know if they fall in this category, if they'd be in here, but you're going to end up. So basically, I think you're going to end up in this situation. So it's a non-EMIS reporting entity. You're the one contracting for that person. So you would report a staff demographic record, staff employment record. So you have to set up an employee record, position record, compensation record, all reportable to EMIS with the appropriate position code. But then the position status, you would want to mark that as agency because you are contracting for that employee through an agency, Premier Health. And then the question back to the other previous question. Make sure I'm looking at the right one here. Okay, so this was the question about ESC is paying an employee that's being used at that school. So then the follow-up question is, so I do not report anything for them, correct? In USPS, no, you would not. So as long as the ESC is an EMIS reporting entity and they should be reporting their employee, so they should be reporting the staff record. Now, if they're teaching, if it's a teacher teaching your students, then on the student side, of course, there would have to be a course master record, courses being reported tied to that teacher. Okay, so so that is all that would have to be reported on your side for the contracting district. Okay. If you have a transportation company randomly picking up students, do they have to be reported? Randomly picking up? I'm not sure what that means. That sounds a little scary. You might want to, I don't know if you can give us more details about that in here, or if you would just want to contact us through a ticket on that one. I never heard of that before. Okay, and then a follow-up, it is a teacher, so what do I need? Okay, so as far as USPS, nothing. There is nothing you have to do if it's the ESC and the ESC is reporting them. You don't have to do anything in USPS. So again, if it's a teacher, there's something on the student side that will have to tie into that teacher. Okay. And somebody chimed in if they are a teacher of record and they are teaching our students and work through the ESC. I assume we do have to report them. Is that what you said? If they're a teacher of record, they're teaching your students. Again, that's information you're reporting from the student side. If you're contracting with the ESC for their services and the ESC is a reporting entity, EMIS reporting entity, they will be actually reporting the teacher. So again, in USPS, you wouldn't have to report that. Okay, for the bus driver thing, we have a shortage of drivers, and if we can't get subs, we may need to call a company. So you call them periodically. So you don't have, well, so you do have a contract in place with them then, but as needed. I would have to look at that because I would assume you would still have to report a CC record for that. Um, I don't know for certain though, so I don't know if anybody else knows that for certain, but I would think you would. But I'll check on that. Okay, so you periodically use a company for bus driver. Got it. Thank you for explaining that a little more. I'll check on that for you. Okay. Any other questions? A lot of great questions. Like I said, fun stuff. Stuff that gives you headaches. Okay, I'm going to keep scrolling. What time is it? Okay. Where are we? Where did I leave off here? Okay, sorry, I think I went a little too far. Okay, so here's the CC record if you do have to report that. And also in section 3.6 of the EMIS manual, they have this chart about what position code series could be reported with this CC record. And then these are ones that are not reported. Okay. So that's kind of, again, at a glance, it kind of gives you a good idea of whether or not you can even use that record for your situation. Here's a specific Q&A with the EW about a community school contracting for teachers from a traditional school. I'm just going to keep going here. Treasurer contracted to another school. We've seen that situation a couple of times. Okay. Then we have a section about unique or confusing positions. So this kind of gives you a guideline of what things need to be reported depending on, the different types of teaching positions you may have at your district. So hopefully you find this helpful and give you a little guidance there. If you have a resource officer at your district, here's a Q&A with DEW about that you may find helpful. Let's see. We have one here. ESC pays 3 individuals who teach at a joint co-op and alternative school that are non-reporting entities. So again, if you have that type of a situation, you can look at that. Teacher mentor, this is always a fun one too. We've had people report this all kinds of ways to DEW, and this section here hopefully will clarify how those teacher mentors are supposed to be reported. Excuse me. So if you have a teacher mentor, please review this section. And again, if you still have questions, let us know. And then teacher of record. Okay, so here's more information about teacher of record. When a sub is reported as teacher of record. Okay, so there's different bullet points about that on here. Okay, so again, if you have those situations, please review that. And again, you can always refer to the EMIS manual for more details as well. Okay, supplemental position. So this section was added in. Um, so for those of us that have been doing this for a long time, we got used to reporting supplemental positions, thinking, okay, those are 800 series position codes. That's always what used to be reported. Those were the ones that were considered supplemental positions. Well, EMIS reporting, of course, like everything else, changes over time. And according to DEW, the supplemental positions that you report are now defined differently. So it's not necessarily just 800 series position codes. Okay, so supplementals for EMIS reporting are employees whose position status is marked as supplemental, or position type, I'm sorry. Their position type is marked as supplemental. Okay. So typically those are 800 series position codes, but not necessarily anymore. Okay. So, um, let's see. Let me find where it is here. Okay. Right here. In the DEW EMIS manual, section 3.4, if you look on page 3, they have a specific example of a teacher who also has a supplemental position as an assistant athletic director. Therefore, the assistant athletic director position would be reported with a supplemental position with the appropriate position code, which may or may not be an 800 series position. Okay. Um, if you have an employee that their only position is supplemental, then you still have to report them. And keep in mind that estimates may have to be made. We have this bold and highlighted for some areas for the different elements that are reported to EMIS. So a common example that we found is you have somebody marked as a supplemental position, but you're not reporting how many days are worked in that supplemental position. And coaches are the most common ones. And a lot of you don't track, how many days the coaches work. You don't know what it is. So you have to put in your best estimate, but you should be reporting something for their days worked. Okay. So all of the EMIS reporting fields that are available to report, everything has to be filled in, even for supplemental positions. The only field that specifically states is not reported for supplemental positions. See if I can find it. It's in here somewhere. Oh, here. Length of workday. That's the only reporting element in the EMIS manual that specifically states it is not reported for supplemental positions. So everything else, unless you can find something that states otherwise, everything else has to be reported. So give it your best guess if you're not sure what to report. Okay, just report something. And then this paragraph is really important. When you're determining what position code to use for reporting, keep in mind that unless it's clearly defined in the position code section of the EMIS manual, um, you just have to really look at their actual job duties and determine what fits best for what they're actually doing. Don't go by job title, but go by what they're actually doing in that job. So there's a specific example here. The athletic director is a good example because in most cases, they truly are a director. So a position code of 115 might be appropriate for that. However, if their job duties are more in line with actual coaching, then you might need to report 802 position code. Again, that's your call at the district. Use whatever you think fits best for their duties that they're doing. Okay. Let's see. I see something in chat. SERS requires hours for classified supplementals. Okay. Requires hours for classified supplementals. Okay. That makes sense, I think. All right. Um, okay, let me see what else is on here. Okay, and then there's information here that we pulled from several tickets with DEW about supplemental. Should it be reported as supplemental? Should it be reported as regular? So you can look through those. Let's see. Somebody said, I just report the hours when I pay them. You can manually correct hours in the SIRS report when you pay them. Okay. So just some comments about SIRS reporting. Okay. And we're about out of time, everybody. So there's a section here about stipend supplemental payments. Okay, this has been in here before. It's just Q&As. Again, you can look through that if you have those situations to see if it helps you with reporting. Okay, so sorry, I'm going to keep scrolling here to keep going through. Okay, EMIS staff reporting checklist. We talked about that earlier. Here's a link to, well, actually, this is a link to the SSDT Wiki, USPS, and EMIS connection page. This is what it'll look like, but this is where you can get to the actual checklist, plus some other documents that they have. Authorized total principal experience. Those are EMIS reportable fields. Those have to be updated every year. So it's usually at the beginning of the reporting year is when you increment those years. Keep in mind if you have somebody brand new this year, and they don't have any previous authorized years of teaching experience, you're going to report them as 0 authorized years for the first year. Then when they've completed a year in the next year, you'll increment them to 1 year of experience. So keep that in mind when you're doing the increments. You don't want to update somebody too soon. Make sure they've earned their full year before they get that year of experience. Okay, but those are the 3 fields. There are other experience fields in USPS you can use if you want, but these are the 3 that are actually reported to DEW. Okay, so make sure these are as accurate as possible. Okay, and then there's some Q&As about experience, especially somebody that's been in multiple positions, superintendent, teacher, principal. So this gives you guidelines on how you would report their different experience levels. Screenshot of where those fields are located. This is a handy chart about reporting attendance and absence days for EMIS reporting. So it kind of gives you at a glance, it'll tell you whether or not this will be counted for attendance or absence for EMIS reporting. Okay, vacation was just recently changed, so that's why that's has strikeout and is in green. Okay, we were talking about doc earlier. The others in here somewhere. There it is down here. Okay, so if you're actually recording those in USPS, you can see it does affect absence and attendance days. Okay. Okay, and then it goes into more detail about how those are counted. Reminder about long-term illness. Okay, and then the data collector. And I know it's 11:30, so I'm gonna continue finishing up going through the document very quickly. So any of you that can and want to hang on while I go through that, you're welcome to do that. If you have to leave, I completely understand. I appreciate you attending. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out to our team and let us know. But I'm going to quickly go through this. I'm getting there. I'm almost there. 48 out of 55 pages. Okay. So now we're finally getting to talk about the actual data collector, or like I said, some of you refer to it as SIFWorks. So there are validations and reports that are available through the data collector. Okay. And so are level 1 validations. There are level 2 reports that are available. The level 1 validations, as soon as the collection is completed, those are available right away. Level 2s will come back the next day after your data has actually been submitted to DEW. And on the actual collection request tab, when you preview or review the data that's been collected, you can actually look at all of those reports, see if anything shows up as invalid or has errors. So again, this is where communication between the EMIS coordinator at the district and the USPS user are really important so that you can review that data, get everything cleaned up. And again, this is on a continuing basis. So as long as the reporting period is open, these are things that you should continually be checking and verifying and communicating with each other about. Okay, so this is just a screenshot of when you're in the data collector. It'll either say preview or view data depending on the status of the collection. So you can just click this link and then you'll see a screen similar to this. You can either do CSV option, you can do data only, data in fatal, data in all exceptions. I usually do all exceptions so I can see everything. And then you just generate it and you'll see a list of the CSV files you can view. There is also an HTML option if you just want to look at it on your screen. And then if I scroll down a little further, this is an example of what the CSV option looks like. And the arrows are pointing to the different staff reporting records. So here's the demographic, employment, and if you have contract records to report. So it'll give you a count. It'll tell you how many are valid, how many are invalid. Obviously, if you see any invalid counts, you definitely want to look at these. So you can just click on it to download it and then open it up in Excel to review the data. This talks about pay amount rate and the pay type that are reported in EMIS. This just lets you know where those values are coming from. So these bullet points are listed in order of what it looks at first. So it looks at contract amount. If it's greater than 0, that's what it's going to pull. If not, then it goes to pay unit. So it just keeps going in order until it finds a value that it can use to report. Okay, same thing for pay type. Staff missing. Okay, so when you get staff missing, you definitely want to take a look at that report. So here's a screenshot that shows that that has a count of 10 in it. So you definitely want to take a look at that to see why they're listed as missing. The employee appears on there due to one of these issues. So either you didn't have them marked for reporting for the new year and you just need to turn it on. Maybe it was an employee that, they left employment the previous year, but they did not get reported with a separation date and reason, and now you've turned them off for reporting. So now they're showing up on staff missing. In that situation, you can probably just submit an override request to get rid of that error. Another common reason, they were reported previously with what we call a ZID, but now they have an actual credential ID. So you've changed that in USPS and added that credential ID, and now there's a mismatch. It's like, oh, well, I can't find this employee now because that's not what was reported for them previously. So again, that would just require an override, but for that, you need to either send an email to emishelp@metasolutions.net or redesign help, and we can help you submit that override because that has to go directly to DEW. Okay. There is a staff missing override spreadsheet if you have this situation. You can click on this. It'll take you to a spreadsheet that actually shows you how to create what needs to be submitted to DEW. So it'll end up having, I believe, your district IRN, the old ID that was reported, and what the new ID should be. And that's what we send to DEW. We also have a document on our web page on fiscal for EMIS staff missing verifications, so you can look at that. You might find that helpful as well. This next section talks about level 1 validations. So again, after you've collected data, if there's any level 1s, there's going to be a link there, so you can click on that. And this is a screenshot of what that looks like. It's a little hard to see. But it will list fatals, critical warnings, informational errors. So you can see at a glance if any of these records have anything that, if there's any counts, you'll want to take a look at those records. Okay. There's some additional information below that hopefully will be helpful. There's some examples of informational messages, fatals, warnings. If you have fatals, those have to be fixed. Otherwise, those records will not be reported. Okay. I'm going to keep scrolling. Sorry. Level 2. Okay, so again, after your data has been submitted to DEW, the next day you can check for level 2 reports. So this is what it looks like on the screen. You just click that, and that'll take you to this area. The information in here should be filled out already, so that all you have to do is click on Show Reports, and then you'll see something similar to this, okay, right below that screen. Okay, so you can check into all of those reports that are generated. Let me see. Okay. And then report explanations on the web. So on the DEW website, they do have an area where they have EMIS validation and report explanations. Also, when you're checking the level 2 reports in the data collector, there is a help link next to those. So you can actually click on that to get to the documentation that helps explain those more. EMIS validation and report explanation. So this is just a screenshot of that page on the DEW website. So this is an example of the different reports you might see.
Mhm.
Okay, there's a lot more there than what's shown on that screenshot. EMIS Crosscheck. If you haven't used EMIS Crosscheck yet, that's a really nice tool to help you clean up your staff records. There is staff data in them. Um, and you can get assistance with that from your EMIS coordinator if they're not checking this information already, or you want to get in there and look at it yourself. Contact your district EMIS coordinator. They should be able to help you with that. If you have a new
Yeah.
district EMIS coordinator, reach out to our Meta EMIS team, and they will help you with how to use Crosscheck, and help you out with showing you how to use that. Some of the information that might help with staff information, it has these areas in there. So these are things you can take a look at to help you clean up your data that's being reported. And hey, we're almost to the end. Okay, so this is a question we get a lot. Okay, where and how is this data used? How does it affect my funding? So these are common questions we get. We, reach out to DEW and say, hey, my district wants to know, what is this reporting element used for anyway? Unfortunately, they can't always tell us exactly what it's used for. I mean, they have the data, so they can pull it for different agencies that ask for information. Some information goes directly to the local report card. Some information is used for some federal reporting. So it's used in all different kinds of places. So it's hard for DEW to know exactly where everything is going. So they kind of just explain, it's just important to keep your data updated. You can see when I asked about it recently, this is from June of this year. Here's some information that DEW shared with me. So, you can take a look at that. But they really stress that you want all of the data elements you're reporting to be as accurate as possible because you just never know, where it's going to be used. Plus, they specifically say in here, there have been times in the past where somebody didn't report an element because they really didn't know what it was used for. It's not updated or reported at all. And then all of a sudden something happens, somebody's looking at that data, and then districts are scrambling to get that updated. So that's just another reason to keep your data updated frequently. Okay. And then finally, the last page. So these are just different facts about L reporting. So I'm not going to read through those. There is a new thing that I added down here at the bottom. Um, so one of the so this had to do with separation date and reason. It used to be a long time ago. We were told, if you're reporting supplementals, you don't have to put the separation date and reason on there. Well, found out recently, yeah, you really should put separation date and reason on there because there's nothing in the EMIS manual that says, there's an exception. You don't have to report these for, this particular position. So, because of that, we added that in to let you know, yeah, you really should report separation date and reason even for supplementals. So, reached the end finally. So, how bad was it? Yeah, not too bad. About 12 minutes over. So for those of you that hung in with me, thank you so much. I hope you got something out of this, and hopefully I didn't make you more confused because that definitely is not the intention. So please reach out to our Meta EMIS team, our Meta Fiscal team, depending on what kind of questions you have. We will be more than glad to help you. If it's something we can't answer, we can reach out to DEW for clarification. Thank you all for coming, and have a great day, everybody. Thanks.